Mattress Mick, the undisputed king of mattress land. As well as that, just to remind you guys of the text line as well too, if you want to get in contact. Our text line is 085 10 50 181. It's 085 10 50 181. We're on social media at 925 PhoenixFM, on Facebook, on Twitter and on Instagram. And of course you can email us too, info at email, that's not what it is, info at phoenixfm.ie rather. But up next on the show, we are joined in studio by Micheál Kelliher and Darren Byrne as well, who are on to speak to us. Basically, there's a campaign being launched, the Stop Hiding ISL campaign. If people may know of programs where you'll see there'll be, I suppose, sign language interpreters, like Irish sign language interpreter on screen. People may have seen those types of things on television. And I suppose the issue is, correct me if I'm wrong here, that there's maybe a lack of representation in terms of that on television.
Yep. So at the moment, RTE's target for Irish Sign Language access is just 3%, and they generally broadcast that at night time. And who's going to be awake at 2 or 3 in the morning to watch those programmes? And for us, the national anthem at the hurley final was actually signed in Irish Sign Language, and that was such an important occasion for us. But the RTE camera didn't remain on it, it was moving around. And we have to really applaud the GAA for their willingness to have a performance of the Irish Sign Language version of the national anthem in Croke Park, but also they kept it visible on the screen all the time. Even though the background pictures were changing, they kept the sign language visible for everybody there as well. And I mean, it's only a minute. They don't need to be jumping around with the camera.
Yeah.
So they did that at the All Ireland hurling final, and they did it last Sunday again with the football final. Kept it visible and let people experience it. But RTE keep changing, and won't keep it in shot when they're broadcasting it on TV. And so there's kind of two different kind of aspects to it. During the Pope's visit, there were sign language interpreters at all the public events, but the interpreters were being moved off stage and weren't being shown, or kind of placed in a dark area where they couldn't be visible, or they weren't visible to people watching at home, even though there was interpreting happening. And then it ends up that the Pope's speech gets translated 3 times. The first time because the cameras didn't stay on the interpreters who were actually signing the Pope's speech. Then the interpreter who was there doing that but wasn't broadcast filmed it again when he went back home, just so deaf people would know what the Pope had been saying. And then the third time was when RTE did a highlights programme, and there was a third interpreter by the name of Catherine White who interpreted that again. So there was like 3 interpretations of the Pope's speech in 3 different ways. It's such a waste of resource not to just show what was there in the first place, and we just feel that RTE really let us down. You know.
Well, there's a lot to unpack from what you just said there, and we'll get into all of that. Well, I suppose we'll move back and then we'll kind of go through it all a little bit. One of the first things you said that struck me, and I think it struck a lot of people, is the fact that most things that seem to have sign language interpreters on them on television do tend to be at like stupid hours of the night. You know, it's 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and you're sitting there and you've got the interpreter on screen, and it is always this thing. It's like, do they think people who are maybe deaf or hard of hearing are nocturnal or something? It's always seemed very strange to me. And like, is there a reason that's done, or is it just that they're trying to fill a quota and that's the time of day they throw it in?
Really, it could be a cultural and attitudinal thing in RTE, really. A part of our campaign, when we've been working on this, we're talking about the exclusion of ISL and ISL being hidden, Irish Sign Language being hidden. And we're just feeling it happening when the national anthem was performed during the Pope's visit. Even the storm notifications like Storm Ophelia, Storm Emma, the Beast from the East. Hearing people were getting access to the radio and the television, but deaf people were the last ones to find out about emergency situations, and that it's really putting deaf people's lives at risk. And it's almost like the attitude is, they'll be grand, leave them off. And you know, there's been a lot of kind of so the interpreter wasn't being covered when those storm announcements were being made, and there was a lot of kind of backlash over that and a lot of requests, and eventually they started to show the interpreter who was already there at those announcements. You know, and so there's a lot of kind of work being done and asking for that. You know,
an interesting point you made there as well, that emergency broadcasts, stuff like that. I think that's something that people maybe didn't think of or wouldn't think of. That's extremely dangerous. That's putting lives at risk, or there's the possibility of it putting lives at risk because it's not catering to everybody.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I suppose there's so much awareness that we need to raise, and there's so much of a cultural change that needs to happen in RTE, and huge changes really need to happen in RTE.
Absolutely. And then an interesting thing you were talking about as well is during the likes of the Pope's visit, and we've seen it with the GAA finals, that it's like there's the beginnings of an effort that's sort of made where you're seeing these people on screen and you're getting a certain amount of help from interpreters, but that it's not there the whole time, and that it is, cameras are moving off them. It's almost like people don't realise what this needs to be focused on like 100% of the time. We need to capture the entire programme and get the entire message across to people.
Yep. I suppose the national anthem, the way they would show the lyrics of the national anthem. So the bit that we actually got to see was, the English translation version would be like no more tyranny, no more slavery, or and so that's the bit that we got instead of getting the whole anthem, as it was signed.
And I suppose there's, as well as that, obviously what you will be looking for and what you'd be hoping for is a future where this isn't really an issue, obviously, but where we're seeing other television shows, like not just something like the national anthem. Now, the national anthem is important, obviously, it's part of our cultural heritage. It's a big thing that should be brought into for all people. It should be available for all people. But obviously, what would be great if we could have someday is a situation where all television broadcasts are like, I don't even think a majority is enough, but all television broadcasts to an extent should have signed content so people can actually watch them and enjoy whatever the latest TV series is, watch a football match and know what the commentators are saying. Stuff like that. Having analysis of a football match is something that people who aren't hard of hearing, like, you take for granted that it's there all the time. But for what that adds to a game, it would be great for everybody to be able to actually experience that and enjoy that.
Yeah. That's definitely one part of it. And one of my friends in Sweden actually sent me a picture of there was a political debate on during an election over there, and there was two interpreters on screen, and one of the interpreters was designated to the politician who was speaking, and the other was designated to the presenter. And so it was very clear who was speaking at who and who was saying what. Like two on screen, never mind one. And you'd love to see something like that in the future. But it's really that the national anthem is something that we were trying to focus on as a way to get things moving and to get this idea moving forward. Because the 3% target is kind of meaningless. Like you broadcast something at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's you've achieved your target. So what we're saying is, if there's an interpreter present at an event already, if they're already there, just put them in shot. We're encouraging people just to show it. It's already happening. It doesn't take an extra interpreter to come in later into the studio and sign something again. Like I was saying, the Pope's speech gets signed 3 times before people actually got to see it. And so we're encouraging them to have the interpreter beside the speaker and just let it be broadcast. Let people see what's actually happening out there instead of not showing that. And that actually costs them nothing to do, to show what's already happening. But that's why we're saying it's really culture and attitude that we're trying to change within RTE.
And I think definitely culture and attitude is definitely a big part of it. I mean, something like that, something as simple as the person was already there. They were already doing the job that, we just want to broadcast. We just want a situation where people can actually watch it, and they don't get a situation where maybe he's on screen for all of a minute or two and then it goes off to something else. To actually keep them on screen and to have them on camera. There's no reason not to, as you said.
Yeah. Something else, just to say, in terms of like RTE and Irish Sign Language, when the anthem was performed in Croke Park, that person is like incredibly competent and qualified and with kind of like 40 years experience or whatever. The team was 40 years experience in broadcasting or whatever, and there was such a high quality of Irish Sign Language that was being performed there, and the ability was there. But you have a deaf person who's well able to do that, and then they're saying that they have to get somebody else into the studio to sign it again, to like dub over like an actual performance that's happening on the pitch. And it's just like, how does RTE make that determination about whether somebody's like performing right or not? Like, and I suppose the plan was that they wanted the national anthem RTE wanted to broadcast the national anthem on RTE News Now, a separate channel. Like they weren't even, their proposal wasn't even to broadcast it on RTE2 on the main channel. So there's like about 7 deaf people working in RTE in the news with signing, and they asked them to do the national anthem, and 6 out of the 7 said that they wouldn't be competent to do it, that it's not their experience. But the 7th person was actually the person who was in the team performing it in Croke Park on the day, and RTE still said it had to happen in a studio. And we're just like, why does it have to happen in the studio? Do you know, it just doesn't make sense.
It's adding unnecessary steps, first of all, like completely unnecessary steps. As you said, the person was there and was fully competent and able to do it. But the other thing you have to take into account is they're also adding unnecessary costs for themselves, because now they're not just having to, in theory, pay one person who was already there, if they're being paid at all, but who was already there. They're now having to get other people to come in, and as you said, to dub over something 3 times, to re-record it 3 times, it's just, it boggles the mind. I don't understand it. I don't get it.
Yep, and that's where we are.
that's exactly it. I mean, and that's the reason we're having to have this conversation, I suppose. And it's crazy in this day and age that we're having to have this conversation, because it is mind-boggling. It doesn't make any sense. It's like we're trying to, in theory, we should be trying to make everything accessible for anybody and everybody who wants to enjoy these things. And something as simple as the national anthem. And I admire that that's sort of where you're starting with this. That it's like, you know, you're not jumping in and trying to say like, okay, right now, absolutely everything needs to be, you know, fully signed and all that kind of stuff. Just give us something small. Start with something like the national anthem that's really important to us, that we'd like to be able to enjoy and fully take in, just like anybody else. And it is a great starting point. It really is.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose, like, we're only saying it's a minute. We're asking RTE for a minute to be shown, and they're like just running around the houses to come up with reasons not to do it, you know?
Yeah, and it really does seem like that. It seems like they're just like, it's any reason to not do it. But
yeah, and that's why we're saying it's quite clearly cultural and attitudinal. That's where that's coming from, you know?
And I think the idea of that your friend was saying, was it Sweden? I think you said he was from, where.
Yeah, friend from Sweden, yeah.
Where the situation they had, where you had a political debate, and not only were they providing someone doing sign language, which is fantastic, so there was sign language for the whole thing, but they were providing a different representative for each person to make it very clear that this is what person A is saying, this is what person B is saying. There's no confusion there, there's no having to, I suppose, preface everything with this is what this person said. It's just, you know, this is what's being said, this is what these people are saying, and you can just, you know, enjoy it to the same level anybody else would.
Yeah. Even during the referendum, the Eighth Amendment, we had a lot of learning from that, because we were looking at the debate on the Late Late Show. I was watching that with my deaf friends, and some of my deaf friends weren't following the debate at all. They weren't able to, they'd no idea kind of what was going on, and that's a real issue in terms of access to information around politics, elections, be it the presidential election, general elections, referenda. Access to that information is crucial for deaf people, you know. So that's where interpreting is kind of needed too.
And a thing as well, I think, that we need to point out to people listening is, obviously some people might be listening thinking, oh well, you know, subtitles exist for films and for TV shows and stuff like that, and we can look at subtitles, and people who are hard of hearing or completely deaf can read subtitles. But of course, you can't subtitle something that's happening live. You know, at the end of the day, if you're watching a football match or you're watching a political debate or something like that, this is where sign language stuff maybe needs to be focused on first. And I could be wrong about this. This is I suppose just from my outlook on it, but it maybe should be something that should be focused on first, because live content cannot be subtitled as it's going out live.
I suppose just to clarify a little bit, some deaf people use Irish Sign Language as their first language, so they wouldn't read subtitles to the same level, because English is like a foreign language to them in a way. And so that can be difficult for some deaf people, and that's why you were focusing on Irish Sign Language as their first language that's accessible to them. You know?
That's brilliant. Like, that's something that I didn't know myself, and I'd say a lot of people listening in probably didn't get that as a, you know, didn't realise the Irish Sign Language. As you said, we do have to think about it as it's a language, you know. It's and therefore that, you know, English might not be easy for somebody who maybe, if sign language is their first language, English might not be as easy for them to kind of to just read along with.
Yeah. So like we talk about like Irish Sign Language, English, and Gaeilge or whatever being totally different languages. They all have different grammatical structures and stuff like that. Like in English, if you were to say like, I suppose the sentence like "I am going to the shop," you could do that in a very different way in Irish Sign Language, but it's not following the same grammar as English. You know, and it probably wouldn't come across on the radio the distinction between them, but they're very different grammatical structures too. So.
And then we're specifying Irish Sign Language as well. I think a lot of people maybe wouldn't even realise that there is a multitude of different sign language variants depending on where you are in the world.
Yeah. So in the north, it's a really good example. They've 2 sign languages up there. So they've Irish Sign Language and British Sign Language in Northern Ireland. And in Canada, there's actually 2 sign languages as well. And in Indonesia, there's about 12 sign languages.
That's mind blowing. Like but I think it makes sense because at the end of the day, they're languages, and you know we don't find it crazy that in all these other countries that there's so many languages, like spoken languages. It shouldn't be strange, I suppose, that there's that number of sign languages. It really makes sense.
Yeah. I suppose like a lot of the research in history, you know, you'd look at like I suppose deaf families. Perhaps in the past, when there wasn't a strong education system, you might have had like intergenerational deafness, and people would almost like families would be generating their own sign languages. So you could have like pockets of variance as well, because there was no standardized access to education or whatever.
So I suppose before we wrap up here, there's just so much we could go into and unpack, and sadly, obviously, we're restricted for time. It would be something I'd love to maybe get you guys on to speak about again. It would be really, really great.
Lovely, yeah.
But in terms of places people can go, whether it be online, there's online resources, stuff that people can look at if they want to learn more about what's going on here and maybe how they could help to, you know, get behind the cause.
Yep. I'd really recommend that people follow the Irish Deaf Society on Facebook. They provide Irish Sign Language classes and stuff like that all over the country. And they could also follow us, our kind of hashtag #StopHidingISL. We have a lot of ideas about where we're kind of going to go in the campaign, but it's hashtag #StopHidingISL and then following the Irish Deaf Society. They're the 2 main ways to go, I think.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, guys, thanks very much for coming in and chatting to us about this. Absolutely fascinating, and I think hopefully kind of shine the light on something that people maybe just don't have as strong an understanding of, and hopefully this helped. We spoke in the last interview about if one person hears something like this and it sparks something, then we've done our job. You know, we've gotten through to somebody, and hopefully we have done that today. Hopefully there's some people listening who are like, look, this is something we